Unbroken, healing through storytelling. Unbroken, the podcast, with Madeline Black, healing through storytelling.
Hello and welcome to Unbroken, the podcast with me, Madeline Black, where I am passionate about sharing people's stories because I love the power that comes from sharing stories. I think there can be so much healing, and these are all stories that will motivate you, inspire you, but more importantly, bring you hope. So today I know you will love my guest. It's kind of, we were talking just before, she has actually interviewed me, so it's nice that the tables are turned today. Today I'm going to interview Ella Dove. She is a journalist and author and trustee of the Limbless Association. In 2016, she lost her right leg below the knee following a freak running accident, tripping over while out for a jog. Since then, she has been on a mission to improve knowledge and awareness of amputation, trauma and disability through her writing, charity campaigns and speaking events. She is passionate about emphasizing the importance of finding positivity through adversity, resilience, and the healing power of writing. There is hope after trauma. There is light through the dark. It can and it will get better. Ella, welcome to the show. So lovely to see you here. How are you?
Lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
A pleasure. So the very first question that I ask all of my guests is that what does the word unbroken mean to you?
So I think for me, there's a sort of physical side and a mental side. Obviously, the physical side for me is I'm an amputee, and I was broken in terms of physically when I lost my leg, but now I have healed and I'm unbroken in that respect. And then the more sort of psychological side is about that inner strength and that resilience that you kind of cultivate when something really traumatic or awful happens, and sort of finding that strength through adversity, I guess.
Absolutely. So could you just tell us what life was like before you had this freak accident?
Yeah, sure. So I was 25 the year it happened in 2016. So I had a very hectic social life. I'm a journalist, so I was often out at networking events. I was actually out most nights of the week having dinner with friends and things like that. I was fairly active. I'm not the most sporty person, but I would go to the gym and I would occasionally go for a run. I'm sure more about that later. But yeah, it was a very kind of hectic pace of life, and I was barely at home, and yeah, just always on the go, really.
As your granny would say, it sounds like you're burning the candle at both ends.
She did and does say that to me, yeah.
That's what my granny used to say. So can we talk about that day when you did have this really weird accident?
Yeah. So what happened was I was out for a jog with my sister who was training for a half marathon. So she is a lot more sporty than me. And I sort of said, oh, okay, I'll go with you just to support you. And we went out just near our home in East London along a canal path, only for probably about half an hour. And then we were on our way back and we were about 5 minutes from my flat, which kind of made it all the more frustrating, actually, when I tripped over just on a flat path, as a lot of us do, tripping over our own feet. But what was different about this is that I knew straight away, as soon as I felt, that I couldn't get up again and that my right leg was at a funny angle. And obviously the pain was really, really severe.
But I imagine at that point you just thought it was broken. Or you had done some damage, yes.
Yes, definitely. And I'd never broken a bone before. So I'd shut my little finger in a door when I was at university. But apart from that, I'd never broken a bone before. So I kind of had nothing to compare it to, that level of pain. And obviously it was excruciating, but I think I just thought, oh, this must be what it feels like. To break a bone. But we had to wait for somebody to come along who could call an ambulance for us, because neither of us had brought our phones with us. That's something that, if I can say anything to people listening, take a phone if you go for a run. We didn't have our phones with us, so we had to wait for somebody to come along, and a man came along and phoned an ambulance. But then he hung up and said he had a train to catch and that he had to leave, which was obviously really, really shocking. And my sister was kind of begging him to stay with us because she obviously didn't want to leave me. So then we had to wait for somebody else to then come along and call another ambulance. And thankfully they stayed with us and went to the main road and flagged down the ambulance. But I mean, I can't tell you how long I was lying there for, because I think trauma does funny things to the brain and kind of blocks certain elements out.
It does. So you got to hospital,
Mm-hmm.
and what was their diagnosis? What did they assume straight away?
So first of all, actually, nobody in the hospital realised how serious it was. I think when you're told, oh, you know, there's a 20-something who's fallen by a canal path, you just assume it's a broken bone, as we all did. So they x-rayed me, and it was a broken bone. I'd fractured my knee really, really badly. One of the kind of most severe grades of fracture that you can get. So they could see that straight away. But the pain, they actually plastered up my leg first of all, but the pain carried on, and they thought, hold on a moment, an alarm bell was sort of sounding, I think, in their minds, because they thought, okay, this isn't a normal level of pain for somebody who's broken a bone. So at that point, they did some more scans, and they realised that I'd developed what's known as compartment syndrome, which is where the blood it collects in a certain part of the body. So the blood couldn't get through to my foot because of the way my knee had fractured, but also dislocated.
They had
So
cut
it
off
meant
the
that,
blood supply.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So the blood couldn't get to my foot. So then I got rushed straight to theatre, obviously, to try and restart the flow of blood. So they took veins from my left leg. I've got loads of scars down the inside of my left leg now from where they tried to kind of restart the blood flow. I think that was about a 12-13 hour operation. It was a really long one. But it unfortunately didn't work. And they tried that 3 times. So over the next few days, I had 3 operations, sorry, to try and restart the flow of blood. And I was in intensive care, and the situation was becoming more and more severe. And then the 4th operation, they said, yeah, really sorry, we're going to have to amputate your leg because it's becoming a danger to you, and you're at risk of developing sepsis and all sorts of
You've
horrible.
obviously got very used to saying that. You just kind of roll it off the top of your, I'm very sorry, we're going to have to amputate. Oh my gosh, to hear those words at 25, what must that have done for you?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think I've told this story a lot of times, and you do become a bit kind of blasé almost about it. And of
You know
course,
your story very well, but for someone to hear that for the first time, to go, what? They told her they're going to cut her leg off. She's only 25. She just had a trip on a run.
yeah, no, of course it was deeply shocking for me, but also for my family, who by that point my parents were there. So they live in Kent, so about an hour away. So they bombed down the motorway to London. And yeah, for all of us to hear those words was really, really horrendous.
What was going
Yeah.
on for you internally?
Well, I think I was on a lot of medication, so I probably didn't really process the weight of what was being said to me at the time. It probably wasn't until later that it really, really sunk in. But I do remember signing the paperwork before the surgery, kind of signing my name on that yellow form, thinking, oh, this something monumental is kind of about to happen. And I also do remember being taken down to the anaesthetic room and seeing my right foot for the last time. It's a really, really vivid memory. The toenails painted red, and I can really picture that. So I obviously did know on some level that this was such a huge, huge thing that was happening, but it definitely took me a very long time to actually kind of come to terms with it psychologically.
And when you woke up, what, I know once the drugs wore off, then where were you at in your mind?
So when I woke up, the first thing I saw was this huge bandage. Obviously, there's a lot of swelling when you have an amputation. So there was this huge bandage where my right foot would have been. And I mean, really, really shocking to wake up and see that and kind of just think, well, that's it now. It's gone. It's not coming back. So yeah, there were a lot of days where I just felt very numb, where I just couldn't look at it for a long time. I kind of would pull the blankets over the top of it. And I do actually remember when that first bandage got taken off, the surgeon coming in to kind of redress my leg and take the bandage off, and me just thinking, I can't watch this. I can't. Not even because I'm squeamish, but just because it was just too traumatic to even kind of begin to sort of process what that actually meant, and kind of look, it was as if I was in denial, I think.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. There's like a kind of avoidance going on. If I don't look, I can pretend it hasn't happened to me. It's somebody else.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think my family were a bit like that as well. I mean, my mum for a long time used to say, when I said, "Oh, I've got one leg," she would say, "No, you don't have one leg. You've got most of your other leg. You just, you don't have a foot." Or she would say things like that, because I mean, I guess anatomically that is accurate, because I've got my knee and I've got a little bit below my knee, but I think, to hear her daughter say I've got one leg was just sort of stark thing that she just couldn't quite. She found it really difficult for me to say that. Even now, sometimes I say, "Oh well, I can't do the washing up. I've got one leg," or whatever, and she kind of will look at me, and sometimes she'll laugh, but I think other times she sort of struggles with the way that I sort of lean on that kind of dark humor.
But has it been humor that's helped you get through this?
I think partly, yeah. I mean, the kind of phrase, "if you don't laugh, you'll cry," we definitely said that a lot when I was in hospital. And there were some quite funny sights. There was a man in the bed opposite me, on the trauma ward, who was just on so many drugs that he just kept singing the song "We Could Be Heroes" over and over again, like one line of it, just over and over again. And things like that, where you just think, well, that is quite funny. You have to kind of find a little bit of light in these dark situations. But obviously there were days where I just cried, as well. So I remember there was one day I was in a private room, luckily, for quite a lot of my recovery, in the hospital, in London. But there was one day where obviously they have to move patients around when new people come in and they need beds and things. So they moved me onto a ward, and I'd had probably about 2 or 3 weeks by that point in a private room. So to then suddenly be moved onto a ward, and a trauma ward as well, which is a very kind of, there's a lot going on. People are there for all sorts of different reasons. You've got sort of stab patients, and there was like people with dementia who'd had falls. Like, trauma is such a broad thing, and it can mean so many different things. So to be suddenly among all these people on this ward really did sort of trigger something in me, and that was a point where I had a day where I just had the curtain around my bed. I just said to the nurses, "Just keep the curtain around me. I don't want it to be opened." I wanted to be encased in this kind of little shrine almost, and just be there with my sadness, and not have to kind of like face up to where I was. So yeah, it was definitely a real kind of roller coaster of emotion.
And how long did you end up staying in hospital for?
So I was in hospital for, I think, 6 weeks in the end. And then I went back to my parents' house in Kent for 4 months, where I was in a wheelchair because my knee was so damaged. I needed to wait for the bones to heal before I could begin to even think about getting a prosthetic leg. So I had this big, it's called an external fixator. It's like a big cage on my leg, with pins going into it that were piecing the various bits of bone back together.
Yes,
Sorry if anyone is squeamish.
My friend who's also had a knee injury. It's quite horrific to look at. You literally see it go right through the side. Yeah,
they're pretty gross, and you have to kind of keep them clean because there's obviously a huge risk of infection, which thankfully didn't happen to me. And I had to go back to the hospital every week to kind of have it looked at. But that went on for 4 months. And then they took the cage off, and they took me back into hospital. They didn't necessarily have to admit me. They could have done that as an outpatient, but they took me back in because they wanted to send me to a rehabilitation centre for amputees, and you had to be an inpatient, just hospital bureaucracy. You had to be an inpatient to go there. So they admitted me again, even though this procedure to take this sort of cage off was fairly minor. And then that was actually a really difficult time because I was by this point I'd adapted to moving around in a wheelchair, and I could wash myself, and I could, go to the toilet without help and stuff. and I wasn't on any medication by this point. I'd managed to kind of slowly come off all of the pain medication that I'd been on. But I found myself in hospital waiting for a bed at this other place. So that was really, really hard to come to terms with psychologically. I think, you know, going back to the place where all these horrible memories were, as someone who is then relatively well, that was really, really hard.
It's a bit of a crazy system, really, isn't it? And how
Yeah.
long did you spend then in the rehabilitation unit?
So after about 3 or 4 nights in hospital, I then got transferred to the rehabilitation unit, which is in Lambeth, and I was there for 5 weeks, I think. Normally, the average time for an amputee to be there is about 6 weeks, but I progressed. I think because I was young, I progressed fairly quickly, so they were able to let me out a week early. And while I was there, I mean, it's an amazing place. It's a 12-bed unit, so 12 patients at a time, and you have intensive physio. So you have physio twice a day, you have occupational therapy, there's a counsellor there if you want it. I said no to that because I was kind of so focused on the physical recovery at that point that
One thing at a time.
yeah, exactly. I'd convinced myself I wasn't the sort of person that needed counselling, which is of course ridiculous. So, you know, every time they try and make me have a session with this woman, I'd be like, no, don't want to talk to you. Like some sort of stroppy teenager. So yeah, and I was there for about 5 weeks. And it was there that I was cast for my first prosthetic leg and sort of slowly took my first steps.
And it's very different to the leg that you have now, isn't it? You've got a very kind of clunky, regular, basic leg.
Yes, yeah. So obviously, as I said, there was a lot of swelling. So in the first year after amputation, amputees typically have to have quite a lot of different sockets, just to deal with the ever-changing shape of their stump. So to begin with, you will have a kind of quite basic one because you know that it's going to need to be replaced fairly quickly. So it's a socket that you put these things called stump socks on your stump, and then you slide your stump into the socket, and then there's this silicone sleeve that pulls right up over the thigh. So even though I'm a below knee amputee, I had something going all the way up my thigh, which was actually really difficult because it gets quite so gross, it gets quite sweaty. So it starts to sort of slide down quite a lot if you're active, that is, which I was. So yes, but now I have a different mechanism which is called a pin lock system, which basically means I wear a silicone liner that only goes up to probably a few centimeters above my knee. And it's got a pin on the end of it which clicks into a hole in the prosthetic leg, and that locks it. So there's a button on the side of my leg that I press to release it. So it's just a much easier system. But of course, there are so many.
Yeah, it's how it looks.
Yeah.
You've got a little tattoo on your ankle. You've got lovely toenails. You've got beautiful shaped foot. I mean, a quick glance, you almost wouldn't know.
Yeah, so that's not my daily leg. That's my day-to-day leg that I use at the moment. It looks a bit like a mini running blade. It's got a sort of C-shaped foot, which goes into kind of a foot shell, which means you can wear trainers or whatever. But what you're talking about there is my high definition realistic leg, which was custom made to look exactly the same as my left leg. So I raised a lot of money for that one.
Yes, I remember you were campaigning to raise money.
Yeah, so I had to do a lot of crowdfunding, and I did a comedy night at the Comedy Store in Leicester Square. Managed to kind of raise a lot of money for that one because, of course, when you trip over on a flat path, it's not like if you're in a kind of car accident, there's no insurance. You know, there was nothing that I could sort of get back.
These high custom legs aren't available on the NHS then?
No, they're not. So you can get certain levels of silicone on the NHS, but I think there's like probably 5 or 6 different skin tones. It's not as exact as, you know, your exact skin. So I went to this private prosthetist called the London Prosthetic Centre, who are amazing. And yeah, they designed it specially for me. And as you say, I've got a tattoo on the ankle which is a little dove, because obviously my surname is Dove. So
is it your going out leg?
It is, you could say that. Yeah, you could. Actually, I do wear it mostly for, yeah, when I'm dressing up, going to weddings, or when we used to be able to be allowed out to places. Um, so yeah, for going to weddings or parties or whatever, and I can wear high heels with it, as you mentioned. It's got an adjustable ankle, so you can press a button on the ankle, and then the foot raises up to whatever height you need according to the shoes you're wearing, which is
Pretty
really amazing.
pretty incredible, isn't it? The technology, the engineering behind it. And you
Mm.
also have a blade now, don't you, for running? I've seen videos of you out running again. So you didn't stop you from running.
No, it took a while. It did take a while. But I mean, basically, I got a running blade because I thought they looked really cool. That was how it started. Yeah, and again, I had to fundraise for that as well. You can get, if you're under 18 on the NHS, you can get a blade. Children get blades on the NHS. But yeah, so I fundraised for that one as well, and yeah, I got a running blade a few years ago now, and actually what 2020 has given me is no other excuses, because there's no other exercise really that I can do. Well, I can do classes in my house and things like that, but my sister said, okay, well, maybe we should use this as a time for you to kind of build up your confidence on your running blade. So with her, obviously, I feel much more comfortable going with her because she's been with me the whole way along this journey and is really, really sporty. And so she can help me. So I call her my coach. So she comes out with me, and we've been slowly building up. And I can do 5K now, which I'm really proud of.
And it must have felt very vulnerable the first time that you went out on it, to trust that it would hold you, or
Yeah, definitely. It really did take a while. And even now, I mean, when there's an uneven road or whatever, I struggle going to like new places and doing new routes, because I do get quite panicky and I feel this kind of like anxiety knot in my stomach. And I mean, it's understandable, I suppose, isn't it? So
absolutely. So how did you turn it around? Because as you said in the beginning, there were lots of days with tears and numbing out and avoiding, denying. And now you are really, your posts are so positive, and you do so much raising awareness on Instagram of all your lives that you do. I've seen quite a few of them. What did you do to turn it around?
I think I mean, I have positivity on my side, I think, because I've always been quite sort of naturally positive. And I'm very much a glass half full person, which I think having that mentality already probably helped. But a lot of people would say to me things like, oh, I couldn't have gone through that, or I couldn't have coped with that. And I'm sure that you've had people say things like that to you, but the answer that I always say is that you cope because you have to cope, because you have no other choice. You have
Well,
to.
you do have a choice. Your choice was to, not embrace it, and to not do what you've done, and to lead a much smaller life. But you didn't choose that. You chose to accept, this is now my cards. This is what life has dealt me, and I need to live it.
Yeah, no, that is true. I think there's coping with it, and then there's embracing it, isn't there? So yeah, I suppose they are different things. And my therapist, after about a year after the accident, I suddenly realized, okay, I need to talk to someone, because I was kind of experiencing mild sort of PTSD symptoms. I was having flashbacks and like horrible dreams, and
That's
you
not
know
mild, that is PTSD.
that okay, that is PTSD.
I am a therapist as well.
So I spoke to my therapist, and she was telling me about kind of acceptance, and obviously the different stages of grief, and how acceptance isn't about kind of liking, wanting, or approving what's happened. And she said you can still be sad and still be in that place of acceptance, and that was something that really resonated with me, actually, and something that I try and kind of hold on to now. Because the bad days are few and far between now when it comes to my accident. I will occasionally, I think it's probably linked to when I'm sort of stressed or anxious about something else, I will occasionally still have that dream where I have to relive the accident, and it's like I'm sort of watching it happen again. So I do still have that, but it's very rare now. But I think learning about kind of acceptance and how the mind works has definitely been a big part of what's helped me.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say how the mind works, because one of your videos the other day was how you literally would fall out of bed every morning because you kind of forgot that you only had 1.5 legs now, and you just went to stand on your 2 legs and there wasn't the second foot there.
Yeah, and I think that's common for amputees, particularly in the early days. You kind of go to sleep and forget that you're an amputee. I think your brain takes a while to adapt to that, because of course I had 25 years with 2 legs. So I imagine it's different for amputees who are born with their amputations, or who have them as very young children or babies. But yeah, for me, I still remember what it was like, to have 2 legs. And when I talk about it now, I can still feel my right foot, or where my right foot should be. I have a kind of tingling sensation, it's called phantom sensation, and phantom pain and phantom sensation are kind of the same thing.
And is that comforting or is that weird?
It's quite comforting, actually, in a weird way, because it's kind of like all those nerve endings are still there, which I kind of like that. I don't like it quite so much when it's pain, rather than like the pins and needles tingling that I've got now, which obviously when I think about it, I've got it, and it's just so interesting that that's what the brain does. But sometimes when I'm quite run down, or I don't know, if I'm like hungover or if I'm ill or whatever, then it can become pain rather than sensation, and that is when it kind of jolts you, quite often at night, actually, as well. I think it's something to do with sort of relaxing, and your brain shifting into a different sphere or whatever. I'm no expert on this, but
Well,
sometimes
you're quite an expert now, though, expert in an area that you never thought you would be an expert in, really.
No, true. But yeah, sometimes at night it will kind of jolt me awake, and it's kind of like a sudden sort of spasm of pain. And a lot of amputees have this quite badly. For me, it's not that bad and it comes and goes, but some amputees have it constantly, and there are all sorts of techniques to kind of try and minimize it.
So can we talk about your fantastic book, 5 Steps to Happy? You wrote it as a fiction novel, but it's really based on what happened to you, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So the first chapter, the main character Heidi has the same accident as me. So the same setting, a canal path in East London. She trips over. She's on her own. She's not with anybody, like I was with my sister. So from then on, it is fictional. The plot from that point is fictional.
Why did you choose fiction over non-fiction rather than writing a memoir?
Well, yeah, I mean, originally I was thinking about non-fiction, actually, and I still do want to write something about trauma, a sort of non-fiction book in the future. But it just came about in a conversation with somebody. I mean, I'm lucky in journalism that I kind of know people in publishing already, which
You've
probably
got good contact, yes.
yeah, exactly. So it came about in a conversation with somebody where I'd secured an agent for a non-fiction book, and then I was talking to this editor who I know, who works at the publisher Orion, and she said, well, have you thought about fictionalizing your story? Like, what an amazing opening for a novel. And then I thought, oh, okay. And I've always loved creative writing. I did a novel writing course the year before my accident, so it's obviously something I'd always wanted to do.
It was in there already.
Yeah. So it kind of it was like a light had sort of switched on in my brain, and I thought, oh yeah, actually, this could be a good way to explore it, and it actually was quite cathartic as well.
And it's a very, I don't want to give the plot away, but it's a very uplifting, it was just a beautiful book to read. It was just so full of hope, even though she obviously is an amputee as well. Was that always your idea from the start? You wanted to make it about hope?
Yeah, I think so. And I think one thing I've really learned is from going as someone who knew like woefully little about disability to somebody who now, I've met all sorts of people that I wouldn't have otherwise met, and I really feel like I've learned a lot. in the past 5 years, one thing I really have learned is that disability doesn't mean inability.
Yes.
And, you know, you see some incredible people doing amazing things, and it really has opened my eyes a lot. And so I definitely wanted that message to come across in the book.
Absolutely. I've interviewed someone called Unstoppable Tracy Schmidt, who is a born of four-way amputee. She is unbelievable. So she's the first amputee to climb the Himalayas. She has captained tall ships. She's sailed against able-bodied men, and she brought Uber to Canada. She just, nothing stops her. She just has no legs, one little arm and one finger, and that's it. That's all she has. And she is phenomenal. And she says, you know, I'm not unstoppable. You can be unstoppable as well with all of your limbs.
Yeah.
A lot of it is in our mind, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Wow, she sounds amazing.
She was cool. She was really cool. And in your book it says sometimes all it takes is one small step.
Exactly, yeah. And I think we can all relate to that in a way. That's the other thing. This isn't a book just for amputees or about amputees. It's something that I'm trying to I tried to make the themes a lot broader than that. And, you know, whatever your kind of obstacle is, whatever the kind of difficult time you've gone through, you know, whether it is trauma like me, or whether it's something different, maybe it's grief, or, you know, whatever it is, I think it's showing that there is that possibility to kind of come back from that, and to take a small, I mean, it might be a very small tentative step, but just to take a step in the right direction, and kind of slowly find light through that darkness, I guess.
It's a very powerful statement, because it was just one small step that you took that led you to being amputee, but it was one small step to changing your mindset. And in the book, I guess it's really about confidence, trust and belief, really, isn't it, which we can all build on.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, I love that. One small step for the accident, and I've never thought about it like that.
Oh, that's what I automatically went with. So I spoke to another incredible woman called Tasha, who at 16, she was rehearsing for a school play, and somebody took the trapdoor off the trapdoor, and she fell backwards. And her book is called My Last Step Backwards. So she took her last step backwards. She's now being paralyzed, but she also took in her mind, it was her last step backwards. So that's why I automatically saw these two meanings in that sentence.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us now about being this voice for amputees, how this all came about?
I can, yeah. So quite early on, I heard about this charity called the Limbless Association that I had never actually heard of before becoming an amputee. But they have a program called the Volunteer Visitor Scheme, which connects amputees to each other, and it's a kind of peer support scheme. It's a really, really good idea. And one of their kind of representatives regularly comes into the rehabilitation centre where I was to give talks and to provide information. You know, there are so many things that amputees are kind of entitled to in terms of benefits, and, you know, things that you just wouldn't know about unless somebody had told you. So he came in and gave a talk, and I immediately thought, oh, okay, maybe this is a charity that I could get involved in. And so I stayed behind after the talk and chatted to him a little bit. And then I ended up having a conversation on the phone with the charity CEO. And I said, you know, I'm a journalist, if there's anything I can do to help you. And then the charity have a magazine, a quarterly magazine. So I started off doing a little bit of writing voluntarily for the magazine. And it kind of grew from there, because one thing I said to her really early on actually was that I hadn't really seen a lot of younger amputees. You know, in the rehab centre, out of the 12 of us, I was sharing a room with a girl who was a few years older than me. But apart from that, she was 30, I was 25. And apart from that, everybody else was a lot older than us, probably 70 plus. So I suddenly realised that there was this need to particularly target young amputees and create a community there. And so then the Limbless Association, when I went to them with this idea, they appointed me as their young ambassador lead. So I'm now kind of working on it with them in different ways that we can kind of support and promote, one of which actually is a podcast which is launching on the 3rd of February.
Brilliant. And what's it called?
It's called Amplify. So
Okay.
Amplify Supporting Young Amputees is the full title. And each episode I talk to a different set of amputees and clinicians about different aspects of being an amputee. So there's mental health, there's body confidence, there's phantom pain, as we chatted about earlier. Going for goals. There's all different things, and there are 6 episodes, and we're hopefully going to carry on and do a second series. So that's been something that's been really
fascinating. I will be tuning. By the time this one is aired, it will be out, but I will tune in to listen to it. So you've written one book. Is there another book in the pipeline? Are you working on something now?
I am, yes. It's not about amputees. It's a completely different novel, not linked to 5 Steps to Happy. I wanted to kind of prove that I am not a one-trick pony, as it were. So in some ways, this one feels like it's my first proper book, because it's not tied in with my own life story. It is made up. I mean, obviously aspects are drawn from, different emotions and things I've seen, but it is kind of made up in the sense of it's not something I've personally experienced. I don't have a publisher for it yet, so I'm waiting. So I don't know how much more I can say at this stage, but watch this space, I guess.
Watch this space. And just before we end up, could you give us maybe a few tips or advice, things that really, really helped you on the dark days? What really got you through?
Actually, there was one thing that my auntie, who is a physiotherapist, really, really helped me with, which was she gave me a tiny little notebook, no more than the size of a kind of post-it note. And she said, if you've got worries, this was really at the beginning when I was in hospital, right at the beginning. And she said, if you've got worries, write them down on here. And then I want you to look at them and kind of acknowledge them. And then I want you to rip out the bit of paper and just screw it up, throw it away somewhere. And it was such a physical thing, and it actually really, really helped. It sounds so simple, but I found it really cathartic, and it really helped me to sort of kind of like process all my worries and come to terms with them in a way, and just sort of starting to think about what I could control and what I couldn't control, and also writing down small achievable goals. So I had a list of longer term goals, such as go on holiday with my friends, go on a plane again, do my commute to work. I had things like that, but then I also had things like go up and down a set of stairs, or manage to kind of get to the bathroom and back on my own. Right from the very beginning, I had longer term and shorter term goals, and so having a small thing to focus you and something that you can accomplish. Obviously everybody loves ticking off a list, and that sense of accomplishment when you manage to achieve something, and that you can find that in the small everyday things, not only the kind of bigger life goals.
And I think what you said there, it's such an important place to end with. Focus on what you can control and what you can do, rather than focus all that you might not have anymore, but focus on what you can do. So, Ella, I just want to thank you so much for coming on to Unbroken, the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure to interview you this time. Thank you for being a guest.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Unbroken, the podcast, with Madeline Black, playing now on all the main platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher for Android, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and here. Play Unbroken, the podcast, with Madeline Black. Unbroken, healing through storytelling. Playing now on all the main platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher for Android, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and here. Play Unbroken, the podcast, with Madeline Black.